Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicola Winters. Welcome to today's webinar. So today we're going to be talking about international marketing and how to get the most out of your digital marketing campaigns. So what you'll learn today and what I'll go over is why best practice CRO techniques are fundamental, and a bit of an overview really about what best practice looks like. A little bit more detail about traditional A/B testing, but we'll have a look at sort of how to get over those sorts of cultural considerations within international markets, and also addressing issues like lower volumes of traffic, to gather data, to disprove hypotheses and stuff like that. So just very briefly, for those who aren't familiar of Search Laboratory, we are an integrated global digital marketing agency, and we've got around about 150 people, and we are split between offices in both the UK and the US. So I guess in practical terms, that just means that we can support clients in all stages of the online user journey. So we offer services like SEO, paid media, programmatic advertising, right through to social media management. And we provide our clients with a digital strategy as well. We're able to do that globally, and that's because we have an in-house team of multilingual linguists as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping for you. The webinar today should be around about 30 minutes, but if you do have any questions as we go along, feel free to just send them through via the chat box at the side of the screen, and I will make sure that I spend just a few minutes at the end answering these as well. So just a little bit more about myself. I'm, like I say, Nicola Winters. I work here in the UK office in Leeds, and I directly manage the in-house team of Mother Tongue digital marketers. We actually service our clients in around about 18 countries and in over 30 languages as well. And I remember when I first started here thinking that that was a pretty unique setup, but actually through servicing more and more clients, I've realized that it's absolutely essential to be able to do it both strategically and correctly. And we sort of pride ourselves at being proactive at understanding those cultural differences, and it's something that's quite key to CRO. So understanding user behavior, their preferences, but then also kind of their expectations in certain industries as well. So just to kick off then, we should all be aware that conversion rate optimization is all about sort of opting your site for the user and increasing the number of visitors who ultimately convert. So that could be anything from signing up to a mailing list, requesting a callback, right through to actually completing a purchase. So by creating sort of multiple variations of the same page, and assigning different users to those pages, either the control or the variant, we can see how changes impact the number of people converting. And the key thing for us here is CRO helps absolutely every channel, especially a channel like PPC, where essentially you are paying for that traffic that's going to your website. And an increase in traffic doesn't necessarily mean growth in revenue. And so when we think about sort of the user journey and the buying funnel, CRO is all about sort of allowing customers to slide through that quite easily. And it's where the action comes in as well. So it's at the heart of almost every digital marketing campaign. And we need to think much bigger than simply landing page optimization. We need to be thinking about websites. So Carl Blanks, who is from one of the world's leading CRO agencies, he actually said quite recently that web design is just, CRO is just web design done right. So if you're really sort of struggling to put a definition on it, it's literally scientific web design, if you like. And that sort of mentality of testing theories and things like that is part and parcel of quite a lot of huge business strategy as well, and culture. So when we look at a few of the big brands, Amazon have come out recently to say our success is a function of how many experiments we do per year. Google, as we know, has a culture that encourages experimentation. Netflix as well, we use experimentation and testing to inform as much of the business as we possibly can. And then right down to someone like Booking.com, our aim is to create the best product for our customers, and we do that through constant innovation and testing. And so CRO is about testing how changes on the page impact a user's behaviour. And I guess a step-by-step process of that is, the first thing to do is identify which parts of the website aren't performing or as well as they could do. And you use quantitative data here. You can either take that from your CRM systems, analytics, and also third-party tools such as like Hotjar or Crazy Egg. The next step is to gather that data using customer surveys, focus groups, and everything to find out why these things aren't working, and use those insights to then create hypotheses, such as it could be anything like, if we make a call to action clearer, will more people convert? Or if we change an image, will more people resonate with what we're trying to achieve? And then we create and roll out these page variants that are designed to test that very, very theory. So then we can start to see what changes impact a person converting. Now, the problem is, though, when it comes to international markets, depending on where you are in that sort of cycle of going international, it could be that you're quite new to that market, and so you've got quite low traffic volumes. And that means that you can't always get the right sort of data, the right level of data required to make a sound judgment call on which variant is the best one to use going forward. Another issue could be that you just have limited presence. Quite a lot of marketing budget would be spent on things like PR and advertising, brand awareness campaigns, and that can actually result in quite a lot of irrelevant traffic, and it's about cutting through that noise at the launch of a website. I think the biggest thing that we're all aware of is different languages. So it's not just about translating campaigns and landing pages to the correct language, but we need to think much further than that. So are we using relevant terms and colloquialisms? And there are countries as well that might have different user behavior simply because their background, their way of life, and sort of like attitudes towards the world will massively affect how they behave and interact with online brands. And then, of course, the obvious one is that with different sort of backgrounds and cultures becomes an issue then with web design. So just taking that a little bit further, I wanted to just look at the sort of cultural aspects, can't even speak, in a little bit more detail today. So kind of taken 3 regions globally, Asia and the South Pacific, Europe, and then Latin America and the US. So if we think sort of on a global scale, the average conversion rate, if you like, for an e-commerce website sits at around about 2.86%. But we all know that there will be differences industry to industry, country to country, and then of course whether it even is B2C or B2B. But there are massive differences when we look at those regions anyway. So when we look at somewhere like Asia, only just over half of the population is actually even online. However, when we think about a market like China or Japan, where there's a lot of revenue taken each year online, China celebrates sort of a tongue-in-cheek Valentine's Day called Singles Day every year. And that actually takes more revenue online than Black Friday and Cyber Monday combined, just within that region. So it's still significant. When we think about Europe as well, I think what's key to understand here is, whilst there might be around about 50 countries, 28 languages, actually the UK, France, and Germany alone dominates that Europe in terms of e-commerce. So those 3 markets account for over 2/3 of the total e-commerce sort of turnover, which is very significant. And then in sort of Latin America, recent sort of figures have shown that there are actually just 6 key markets that account for 95% of that turnover. So that's Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. And another thing is that actually almost half of all of those transactions came from Brazil alone. So some key differences there to even think about when marketing to new markets. And then when we look at sort of different cultural aspects of those countries as well, what we can do is sort of look at, is it a collective society or more of an individual society? So with collectivists, they tend to be a little bit more focused on community and relationships, and they will consider quite a lot before they make a purchase. So countries like China and Japan, whereas in Western countries like the UK and the US, we're a little bit more focused on the individual. So when it comes to sort of web design, we sort of automatically go for a clear action, a really sort of strong image as well, and a clear focus on the product. What sort of Western cultures are more bothered about really is what that product is going to do for me. How does it make me look better and my life more beneficial? So to put that into context, kind of putting it in low context, high context societies. Now, the UK and the US tend to fall under a low context marketing sort of focus. So as English speakers, what we generally find more effective and appealing in advertising is things like clean, a lot of white background, straightforward, strong call to actions as well, and clear image of the product. Whereas when we compare that then to sort of lower context, high context marketing, they're more focused on sort of flashy visuals and sounds and things like that we tend to find more annoying. So looking at the Samsung homepage at the moment, there's a big sort of banner ad, other interactive videos, but just very short call to actions, buy now, learn more, and things like that. I'm now going to show you one of the most successful car leasing sites that currently operates within the UK, but it's designed by a Chinese marketer. Now, if ever you visit lingscars.com, I hope that you'll remember what good marketing is again. But actually, this is taken because high context marketing and sort of cultures that like rich content, you can display a lot of things on your website in terms of like multiple graphics, icons, boxes. It could even be animation, basically just it's animated navigation basically. And while this sort of stuff tends to happen more in China, even countries like Japan, Turkey and Mexico, which is of course then going into the Latin American countries, does lean towards more high context. So when building sort of ad campaigns out, start to think about features such as colourful and large images, anything where you can sort of make more dramatic sort of statements of the product, or any celebrity endorsements or anything like that. So when applying this to not so much a car leasing site, but just general e-commerce, as I've mentioned before, low context cultures, to a certain extent, we prefer a little bit more words rather than sort of lots and lots of images. If we do like images, they need to be clean and big. So the first example here is from Debenhams, which is a really successful e-commerce site here in the UK. And then this is Taobao, which is an e-commerce marketplace platform that operates in China. And when we compare those two home pages, like I said, they're both very successful. They're very different though when it comes to their approaches that they've taken in web design. So a lot more images and sort of noise going on the Taobao site rather than Debenhams. And then when we even think about sort of big brands, I'm going to talk about sort of Coca-Cola, McDonald's, even they will change their web design depending on the market that they're operating in. So the main image there is taken from the US McDonald's homepage. And again, you've got sort of the natural center of the page is a giant image of the product. There's also videos further down when you scroll on the homepage with minimal text, most of which is accompanied by that image. Whereas then when you look at the laptop version, that's actually the homepage of McDonald's in China. So as you can see, they've focused a lot more on showing more products as soon as that user lands, more options, different call to actions, and again, there's just more noise. So it's just important to sort of think about those cultural aspects when it comes to web design, even when launching or adding new pages to your website. So when thinking about conducting conversion rate optimization in international markets, we have to think about where you are in the buying funnel, the sort of selling international cycle, if you like. So what we've done for the purposes of this webinar is actually just section out certain solutions that can be applied to PreSite Launch. So this is where you haven't yet gone live, but you've identified the market that you need to enter. You've localized your site, and now it's all about pressing the live button and generating the traffic and revenue. Post-launch, it might be that this is a relatively new website, or it might have been operating for several years but with no real sort of budget put behind it. And then established, it might be that you're in a position where you've been selling globally for quite a while, and now it's just a question of optimizing certain areas of the website. So starting off with a PreSite Launch then, this is where at Search Laboratory we are really keen on helping clients make sure that their websites are market ready. So this means that any sort of changes that need to happen to a website that might help remove any potential barriers that there are for converting, or to adhere to the way that they use the internet and interact with brands, is we like to give them basically just a market readiness report that is carried alongside an on-site sort of translation and localization project. So you can look at this two ways. It's actually, it can either be a market readiness report, or if you've already got a site that went live very, very recently, it could be seen as like a cultural audit, something that just gives you a starting point. The key thing with these is that they are performed by in-market mother tongue specialists. It's industry specific knowledge as well. So if you are operating in something that's quite niche, whether that's I don't know, anything like pharmaceutical or software as a service, it's all about finding the audience that either buys your products or at least is a copywriter within it, so understands the terminology. And we look at everything from legal compliances in that market through to user expectations. So we will look at anything from legal requirements, user interface, user experience, that sort of thing. So it's common for companies, I guess, when they are launching a site, to simply think about just the linguistic elements of it. So like I say, they translate the site, it goes live, they make sure that they can be found as well, so there's probably SEO or a paid campaign associated with that. But then a key thing that's usually missing, that of course helps to actually drive revenue within those markets, is the cultural compliance aspect of that. So our service sort of looks at culture and compliance and analyzes those customs or norms of the target market, and just to ensure that the website I guess aligns with the expectations of those consumers. It could be in terms of on-page content and practical aspects of your website, everything really down to like payment, delivery and returns methods. These can act as massive barriers to conversions in certain markets. So stuff that we look at within a cultural audit. First thing is legal requirements, as I've mentioned. This could be anything from terms and conditions, copyright, the content ownership, and anything like cookie policies as well. So advice can be given really on best practice for websites country to country. Another thing that we will look at is user interface and the accessibility of the content as well. What's the readability like of that web content? Going into things like font size, the font type as well, the content volume, visual elements, layouts, images, colours. These are all the sorts of things that will be tested on CRO tests in the future. And so to identify them at the beginning, literally by looking at who is ranking in that market on page 1, what are the expectations, and then what's the best practice compared to their culture as well. We'll look at user experience, so we'll go as far as working our way through a website, looking at the navigation, going through things like the contact and the order forms, or feedback on call to actions, conversion routes, and things like that. It could even be the pop-ups that you're using. Then we'll look at trust signals as well. That's quite important. Things like reviews, personal data. It could be like protection for the user as well on transactions, or trust seals and certifications. I've got quite a few examples actually coming up of where that is really key actually for European websites, particularly in the German market. Then it's about transactions and checkout processes and things like that. So I've mentioned it, but payment methods, collection policy, returns, that sort of thing. So it's a really extensive report. And I just wanted to go through some examples really of why it's important. So we all know that copyright laws can vary from country to country, and so can other legal requirements. So unlike EU countries, there's actually no legal requirement, to put a pop-up about using cookies in Japan. And although it's recommended, it's not a legal requirement. And actually, through quite a few of our website launches in the Japanese market, we've noticed quite a high bounce rate on the homepage if we're using a pop-up. So that's just one example of a barrier that can be reduced by doing a cultural audit. Terms and conditions as well, it's something that, again, when you're only thinking about the landing page in question and optimizing and localizing the landing page, you then sometimes miss other key aspects. So within certain EU countries, terms and conditions must be translated into the relevant languages. Another key sort of consideration is payment methods and delivery methods. So if a person can't use their method of choice, then not only sort of they'll lose a little bit of trust maybe, but it's instantly sort of damaging that relationship. So it will also signal to that customer that a business is not fully knowledgeable about that market as well. As we can see from the snippet here, this is just in Europe alone, the difference in the preferred methods of payment across Europe, and it is kind of a common thing that we come up against in our team, where it's difficult to change the buying system on any websites, but it is key. So just to put that into perspective, in Japan, it was revealed that 73.7 people would leave a shop if the preferred payment method was not available. So it is key to address that. Putting that into perspective, again, Alipay, which is popular in the Chinese market, accounts for 60% of all online spend. And this icon as well is used in Russia on Yandex, which is their most used search engine. And it's a very popular payment option. So again, just something to bear in mind when thinking about increasing conversions on your own site. Trust signals, when it comes to e-commerce especially, it's sort of related to the issue of online security. So it's important not just for businesses, but also to the users. So they need to be certain that the data that they provide, especially anything to do with sort of their credit cards, any financial data, will be secured. Now, In the UK, we, I guess, are seen as more risk takers. We don't tend to need to see a lot of these trust signals, but in other markets, it is absolutely essential. So we've found through our extensive sort of research and through doing these cultural audits and these tests, that 90% of Dutch customers are familiar with this trademark. And there's also a list on the Search Laboratory website of other recognised sort of seals of approval as well that are needed on e-commerce websites. Delivery methods can be like delivery and legal compliance is a big thing for conversion rate. And just taking a few examples, the first one here from Korea. So cross-border selling is very common in Korea. So they take, I don't know, about $90 billion worth of goods from China alone. And I know that Amazon launched here a few years ago, and they went with their USP of fast delivery. However, didn't really resonate with the Korean audience, as Koreans expect either a one-day or same-day delivery, and they expect it for a relatively cheap price as well. So there really was no USP to exploit there. In Germany as well, we found that 60% of Germans distrust retailers because of personal data issues. So like I say, those seals of approval and trust signals are really key. And then also in Brazil, there is a free shipping day every April. And it's definitely worth mentioning because 70% of Brazilians state that high shipping costs is the main reason why they put off from purchasing online. So again, those differences can really matter. So when it comes to a cultural audit, what sort of the deliverable is, it's a single report and it determines a rating really for how market ready that website is, and it's based on 12 areas in total. So it'll just be delivered as a simple yes or no tick box for whether it's ready or not, but then wherever it isn't, there will be actions and recommendations for you to implement in preparation for that site launch. I think the key thing here is user experience. So that includes, like I've mentioned, the navigation, the contact forms, the call to actions, any sort of potential barriers to conversions is covered as standard in one of these reports. So like I say, it kind of gets you to the next part of it, which is post-launch and usability testing. So this can be looked at in sort of two different ways. It can either be an online like run through, or it can be a focus group, which is more of a one-to-one situation. But the great thing about usability testing is that you actually get to gather feedback, comments as well from users on that site. As well, like I've mentioned before, working closely with any sort of translation or copyright agency, they have access to a lot of industry specialists as well, who can sort of give feedback on messaging, language, and terminology that should be used throughout that copy. And then the great things about using sort of third-party tools and software is that we can start to understand the why, because by using heat maps so that we can see how users are interacting with a certain page, how far they're scrolling down, and what call to actions they're looking at more often, can definitely form a good strategy going forward. So the benefits of this is that we get qualitative data through user testing. We see live visuals as well, or we might want to just have one-to-one conversations if it's more of a cultural aspect that we're exploring. We can receive heat maps as well. And then the most important thing is understand what those drop-off points are once you've got somebody to your site. Excuse me a moment. So using user test and getting feedback from sort of industry specialists and in-market users, the great thing here is that you get to set the brief. So you can be really specific with what you are wanting to get that feedback on. It could be just something like an image change. So you show them two variants of the pages, and you're saying, you know, knowing the culture in France, which image would you use and why? Which resonated with you? Which sort of call to action did you most? So I don't know what I'm trying to say, but did you choose and why? So you can set a bespoke brief, like I've said, or a task. You can actually build audience demographics as well if you know that you have a particular persona within your customers that you want to target, or it might be that you just want to recruit from your current customer list. That is a possibility to get feedback from returning customers. And like I say, receiving that commentary and feedback means that you can actually take quotes out of there and test those going forward. So I just wanted to put this into perspective a little bit. Just looking at call to actions and the variance across certain markets. If we think about Western cultures, so the UK, the US, for example, we're much more sort of accustomed, if you like, to strong, persistent calls to actions. Other markets, that might be somewhere like France or Germany, would prefer a more subtle action, where it's going to provide you with more information or something like that. So localizing them is absolutely essential. The first example here I'm going to go through is the PPC ads for Hugo Boss. So the first one on the top is the UK ad, and the call to action there is buy now, exclamation mark. Whereas the French advert actually uses a much softer translation of that, which is order here. Looking at Amazon as well, this is the US homepage of Amazon, and all 4 call to actions on their homepage is shop now, shop now, shop now. Whereas you go onto the Japanese version of Amazon, and very similar ads, very similar pictures as well. However, when you translate those call to actions, you'll be looking at things like, see what can be done with the Alexa series, see more at Prime Video, or Amazon Fresh 33-day trial. There is no instructions there. And that's because when we're thinking about creating copy for different markets, in the UK, we would always go for call to actions like buy now and get 50% discount, book online now. It needs to be a sense of urgency. Whereas if we were going to go out in Japan, we would change that only slightly, and we would say 50% discount sale now on, an online booking available now. And that's because by doing these user tests, we actually get real life data. And in the Japanese market, including, to be honest, the real world as well as online, we had a conversation with a Japanese user who said that there's a Japanese saying that the customer is a god, and you can't tell God to do something. And so this is why we need to change those call to actions. And actually, this had a really positive result on the landing page in question. User behavior tools as well, so anything like sort of Crazy Egg, Hotjar, allows you to see where people are on a landing page. And it will provide you with data of sort of like drop-off points and things like that. There's a massive advantage to this. So like I've mentioned before, you can create heat map views, but also you can watch how people interact with your site as well. You can do cross-device testing, but most importantly, you can analyze the why as well. So if you know that a CTA isn't being clicked, and you think of changing the messaging within it or the color of the call to action, it might actually be through using behavior tools like Hotjar. You'll actually see that people never scroll down to that part of the page in the first place. So actually the problems are at the top of the fold, and they're the ones that you need to address first. So using these, we can identify the customer drop-offs and create a bespoke report on the sort of behavior flow. And Dan Jones, who is our head of CRO here at Search Laboratory, is adamant that 80% of issues can be identified in just 5 usability tests, and that can then form your strategy for the future. And then lastly then, so when you've got an established international sort of brand and you are looking to test this more and more, when you're sort of looking at medium traffic levels, we can still do a certain aspect of multivariable testing. So that might be where we change colours and call to actions, but we might do that rather than kind of doing it for a week. We instead might look at the seasonality as well of that market, and we might then compare that data to either last week's, last month's, or last year's, depending on those seasonality trends. The key thing here, though, is landing page optimization. This is where you can start to change small aspects and see the difference. So I've talked about imagery before, but again, I just wanted to have a clear example. So localizing imagery, really important. This example here is taken from the US version of sort of a B2B technology provider. And they had exactly the same landing page in France as well, but it wasn't performing at sort of a relatively same scale. And so we did a few sort of tests on this, and what became apparent was it might seem silly and really, really small, but it wouldn't be seen as it would be seen as inappropriate to simply celebrate in an office. And so actually, as soon as we changed that image, we now have much more of a culturally appropriate image, and it works better with the audience. So when tackling sort of landing page optimization, we tend to focus on the audience. So we try and empathize, we then prioritize certain parts of that page, try and sort of address their fears, try and hook them in through certain parts of the copy. And yes, just make sure that we get over the value and the experience and the wow factor within that landing page. And then it's simply about assessing the results. So seeing whether that challenger significantly outperformed the control one, and having a look at the conversion rates before and after. So as I've mentioned, test PPC landing pages. So if you have maybe a sales event, a key sales event, or whether there's something like at the beginning of the week, conversions tend to be at the highest. Start to do these multivariable tests and then compare that data to the last week or last month. It's all about capitalizing though on existing traffic. This isn't about sort of bringing new people to your site, and that's why it's key. Just to finish, I've just got a few sort of examples of other things that you can be doing to maximize that your campaigns internationally. So we work with a lot of businesses, but one in particular is award-winning travel company, and actually they specialize in more tailor-made experiences rather than package holidays, and so it's lead generated. This website, it's not really about purchasing the holiday as such. And our aims were to improve the conversion rate, but also maintain that quality of leads as well, and reduce the overall, I guess, cost per lead. And through a lot of different testing and looking at user experience and changing things on the form and inquiry page as well, we diagnosed, prioritized, and then strategized opportunities that maybe reduce that friction and makes the new page just a little bit more intuitive. And as you can see, the results were really good. So 28% increase in overall conversion and an 8.5% increase in the new number of leads as well. When going out internationally though, there can be sometimes an assumption that globally it's recognized as an English language. So if I can take the industry of software and tech, for example, there's a lot of acronyms that are used within tech that are quite universally recognized. However, if you don't localize campaigns, then actually you put yourself at risk, because tech acronyms actually have different multiple meanings across the markets. There's a few examples in here. We have like an online resource available to download, but this definitely highlighted for us, even across Europe, how key localization is. And then just lastly, we also have another resource that could be beneficial, and it looks at the key sort of sales events around the world. It's looked at the top 10 e-commerce countries. And yeah, this is about sort of capitalizing on sort of paid campaigns and things like that, and making sure that you're using your budget at the right sort of times to push the right sort of messages. Which brings me to the end of today's webinar. I have received just a few questions, so I'm just going to go through them really quickly now. The first question, you've talked about entering new markets. Do you have any advice or tools that you would suggest as to how to choose a market? Yes, there's lots of things that you could do. I think I've said this before, but the first thing to do is just check your own analytics on the parent site. Check where the traffic's coming from, because that would be an indication that there's an interest there to begin with. And then yeah, do look at the search volume as well, SEMrush, as well. Look who's checking the look who's dominating the SERPs. SEMrush does seem to be a favorite with a lot of people, but there's also free platforms like the Google Market Finder, that is quite easy as well. Last question that I have time for today. If you have multiple international campaigns running and all could do with improvements, how do you prioritize them? Good question. Again, it kind of depends where you are in that cycle. So if you've already got localized, no, let me start again. So if you haven't localized every single market site, but you are doing paid campaigns in various new markets, then I would definitely suggest actually focusing on maybe the markets that have a high level of English speakers. So countries like India, Russia, and the Nordics as well. So make sure that you're 100% happy with the conversion rate on all English speaking markets first, and then sort of tackle your different language ones. If you already have localized versions of the site, then it's all about just doing a digital strategy, basically. It's looking at doing a bit of a deep dive into sort of the top 3 markets that have got the biggest opportunity, looking at the competition within that, and then sort of exploiting the gaps, I guess, that the competitors are leaving. But it would all start with understanding the markets. Is there enough money to even be had there compared to the competition? That brings me to the end. So thank you so much for listening. If you do have any more questions, though, feel free to just get in touch to Search Laboratory, and I will answer them in due time. Thank you.